Quiet on set. Speed. And action.
This is what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object.
Welcome to the Foot and Friends on Film podcast, discussing everything about cinema. Now here's your host, Nick Baylor.
I am Iron Man.
I am Groot.
We have hope.
Yeah.
Language. I can do this all day.
Welcome to the official podcast of Foot and Friends on Film.com. I'm your friendly neighborhood host, Nick Mailer. You ever dance with the devil by the pale moonlight? On today's show, John and I assemble as we put the hammer down to talk about superheroes. With great content comes great responsibility. This may not be the podcast you deserve, but it's the one you need right now. You know, I thought my jokes were bad, but I could do this all day. As mentioned, we are the official podcast of Foot and Friends on Film.com, where our motto is any film you haven't seen is a new experience. On today's show, John and I are going to discuss the lengthy history of what is now the most popular genre in cinema, the superhero film. This is by far our longest episode, and it's a bit of a change because John's going to ask me some questions, and I'm going to get to do a bit more talking, but seeing as it's a lengthy one, without further ado, please welcome John H. Foote.
Superhero films have had an explosion in the last 15 years of the movies, and have become both the most popular and most profitable genre in cinema right now, making well over $10 billion over the last few years. But it's not really a new franchise. It began back in 1944 with Captain America, and for a short time there was a Superman series in the 1940s before it launched onto television with George Reeves and the Adventures of Superman. And from there, a few years later, Batman finally made it to the screen in the 1966 movie. Nick, you're a huge Batman fan. Talk to me a little bit about that 1966 film.
Right. Okay. So Batman, the 1966 film, was based off of the 60s television series of the same name, produced by William Dozier.
Yep.
It was released after the first season of the show. They were half-hour installments. It was a very light, campy, cheesy, corny adaptation of Batman, fun for all ages. The episodes would be two-parters. The plot would be set up. Batman and Robin would find themselves in some type of peril with a cliffhanger, and then it would get resolved. And so the film in 66 starred Adam West and Burt Ward as the Cape Crusader and the Boy Wonder, and featured Batman's rogues gallery of villains all teaming up. This includes the Joker, the Riddler, Penguin, Catwoman, played by Cesar Romero, Frank Gorshin, Burgess Meredith, and Lee Merriweather took over the role of Catwoman from Julie Newmar, who played her on the series. And it's a fun romp, and it's most widely remembered, at least for me, for a couple of things. A very famous scene of Batman frantically trying to get rid of a bomb and running around like a chicken with his head cut off, and bat shark repellent, which it's an amazing scene where Batman is hanging off of a ladder from the Batcopter, and a shark jumps out of the water and attaches itself to his leg, and because he's got everything in that utility belt, he has a can of bat shark repellent. So my first Batman was Adam West. I remember watching the television series in syndication, and obviously, unlike later depictions of the Dark Knight, this 60s campy TV show was very user-friendly for all ages, and it had an appeal to me as a young child, and it's interesting as an adult now. You go back and you look at it and you appreciate it for its camp. And so that really was the start of it until we got a more serious cinematic treatment of superheroes in the following decade. But Adam West and Burt Ward iconically played those two characters. Adam West, most known for the role, and he was my first Batman, so there's always a special place in my heart for that.
I remember it was Batman with a pot belly.
Right.
He wasn't like the ripped Batman that we have today. This guy was a little older and out of shape and different in every way. You're right. I mean, it evolved. In the 1970s, I remember New Year's Eve, 1978, going to see Superman. And all year long, we've been watching the ads. You were hurtling through the sky and you were coming up to this S crest. And this deep voice said, "You'll believe a man can fly." And I went to the movies that night and I said, "Yeah, okay, show me." Because I was cynical. And I come out of the movie knocked out. There's a scene where Lois Lane is in a helicopter going to see Air Force One. It crashes on top of the building and she's hanging over the edge. And Clark Kent comes out of the building, sees her, changes, flies up, she falls, and he catches her mid-flight. And she looks at him and he says, "It's okay, miss, I've got you." And she looks at him, "You've got me, who's got you?" And then in a full shot, we see him catch the helicopter with one arm while he's holding on to Lois Lane. And that was it. I was a goner. I believed a man could fly. Talk a little bit about Superman 1978.
Well, this is the movie that set the standard for everything that would come. It was, they got Mario Puzo, writer of The Godfather, to come in and help write the script. And they had Marlon Brando come in to play Jor-El, Superman's Kryptonian father. And it was really getting the big Hollywood, serious treatment. And relatively unknown actor Christopher Reeve was cast as Superman, and he was perfect. He knocked it out of the park. He looked like he was lifted right off the pages of the comic book, and his casting caught everyone off guard, because through the year before they started making the movie, they considered Robert Redford, Warren Beatty, Charles Bronson, James Caan, and just ridiculous choices for Superman, until they finally saw this young guy on Broadway with Katharine Hepburn and tested him, and he was perfect. And you're right, he looked like he was ripped off the pages. And I always thought his great achievement in playing Superman was the way he played Clark Kent, with so much humor and so much fun. Absolutely. The fundamental one of the fundamental problems with Superman, it's not so much an issue in a comic book or when you're drawing it or animated, but to bring it to live action, is this guy's civilian disguise is that he puts on a pair of glasses and nobody recognizes him. But he created such a dichotomy between how he played Kal-El, Superman, and how he played Clark Kent, which is really the fake persona, this Clark Kent. And it was so much more than just parting his hair on the other side of his head. It was his posture. It was, he was this bumbling klutz, and it made that fundamental, ridiculousness of the glasses as the disguise go away. And he absolutely nailed it. And he set the standard for every actor who would go on to play a superhero. And it's that duality of those dual roles that made it believable. And
there's a wonderful scene in Superman Part 2 where Lois Lane figures out who he is in the hotel. And he's got his back to her, and she says to him, "You are Superman." And he straightens himself up. He loses the slouch, straightens himself up, turns around and looks at her. And it's just remarkable. It's so subtle and such a small touch, but absolutely perfect. He becomes Superman right before our eyes.
Absolutely. And Superman is a guy who doesn't have a mask or a hood or anything on his head to make him distinct. And it's really all in the performance. And Christopher Reeve was sublime. And going back to Superman the movie, you have that iconic score by John Williams, iconic music and the opening title sequence, which is just it's an early example of why the Oscars should have an award for best title sequence.
Oh, it's
would
just
be,
breathtaking. Just breathtaking.
yeah. I don't have the nostalgia factor for the movie that you do, just because it came out before I was born. I do like and respect that movie for what it is. I have a fundamental problem with it that I just have never been able to get past, and that's the climax. Um,
I agree with you. I agree with you. It's a stupid ending. It really was.
and you know what? I am willing to suspend disbelief in a lot of really stupid ways for a Superman movie, but it's a little much. But I mean, there's so much about it that works, and it really did set the standard, and it set the mold for what for everything that would come. And again, Christopher Reeve, just pitch perfect casting, and Gene Hackman. I mean, the cast was brilliant.
Even Brando, Brando's got that great line, quasi-religious. So I've sent them you, my only son.
Yes.
The theater gasped when he said that line, because you realize Superman is a god for all intent and purpose. And Brando said that line, and I think people realized, holy smokes, this is intense. This is deep.
Superman, in a lot of ways, is fundamentally an amalgam of Moses and Christ. The baby being placed by his parents and sent down the river is like young Kal-El in the rocket ship, and the son coming to Earth to become savior to the world. There's a lot of biblical themes there, and so yeah, he is a god amongst men.
The sequel, Superman 2 in 1981, a lot of people believe it's a better film than the first one. I for one, don't. It's great fun. It's got some terrific scenes in it. I like the discovery Lois makes that it is indeed, Clark is indeed Superman, and they hook up. But it ends, I think, stupidly.
Yeah, there's a couple of things in that movie which are a bit bizarre to me. There's at one point he removes the S emblem from his chest and like throws it as a projectile weapon, which mildly inconveniences one of the Kryptonian villains.
Yeah.
For a second. Richard Donner, of course, directed Superman the movie, and Richard Lester took over directing duties for the sequel. And there's a shift in tone there. And yeah, I think these early movies kind of had a problem with wrapping up the story. But an interesting point about superhero movies is that they're all second acts for the most part, because you never really want to end the story as you would see in serial and comic book form. There's always got to be an ending opening up to something else. But I mean, Terrence Stamp as General Zod, Kneel Before Zod, there's again a lot of iconic stuff there.
There is, and they were fun films. They were both box office successes, both won Academy Awards for the visual effects.
Yeah.
And were big blockbuster hit movies. The third and fourth one were absolute disasters. Superman 3 with Richard Pryor was just horrific, just nearly unwatchable. And then they waited a few years, and Christopher Reeve actually wrote Superman 4 Quest for Peace. And it is wretched. It was one of the worst films of the year in 1987.
Yeah, it was unfortunate to see the franchise decline in the way it did. And Superman 4 The Quest for Peace was given a fraction of the budget, and it suffered for a lot of reasons.
Well, it wasn't even produced by one of the majors. It was produced by Golan Globus Film, who were Israeli filmmakers who literally chopped budgets in half while the movies were being made, and lied to the directors. And I have no doubt that it happened with this one. In between Superman 3 and 4, we had Supergirl, which was another big bad movie with Faye Dunaway, Peter O'Toole, and Helen Slater as Supergirl, and it was just a mess.
Yeah, it's interesting to see now how Supergirl has worked well as a television series.
Yeah,
yeah. But I think they ran out of ideas, and they were just trying to milk that franchise for what it was worth, and the S and the red and blue and all that. And it's sad. And Superman has had a rough road on film ever since.
Yes, it has. It has. In 1986, George Lucas produced a film that is infamous for how terrible it is, another comic book adaptation, Howard the Duck, which I saw opening day, and I couldn't believe George Lucas had his name attached to this piece of garbage. It was just horrific in every way. And I wonder what you've got to say about that.
It makes you wonder, like, there's a long process to get a movie made.
Well, there's not for George Lucas, though.
Fair enough. But you have to wonder why how some of these ideas made it to the screen. I mean, there's that pseudo bestiality angle, and it's I mean, you know, it is an absolute mess. And is it a superhero movie? Well, yes, I guess technically. It's not one a lot of people would like to talk about. Interestingly enough, the character of Howard the Duck has made a resurgence in small cameo appearances in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And it goes to show that it's not the source material. It's not like any character, no matter how silly, can't work. But
with this one, it was purely the execution. It was just brutal. In 1989, Tim Burton
yes,
was on a hot streak after Pee-wee's Big Adventure and Beetlejuice, and he was handed the plum job by John Peters of directing Batman. And it was highly anticipated he would bring a real dark look to it because he has a dark sensibility as a filmmaker. And again, this was one that had a huge build-up. A year in advance, we were seeing posters and toys, and everything was Batman, Batman, Batman. He cast Jack Nicholson as the Joker, which was brilliant, just an act of genius. And then he cast Michael Keaton as Batman, and people lost their mind until they saw the film.
And thus began the tradition of every new actor being cast as Batman, causing tremendous outrage.
Yeah, and yet this guy pulled it off, I think. Keaton's one of the better Batmans.
He's great. He's a great Bruce Wayne.
Yeah.
He was perfect. He was the perfect choice for Tim Burton's movie, and he made it work. And he couldn't move his neck, you know, he was buried in rubber, but he made it work. And Tim Burton was the right choice to make that movie. And you got a sense of the Dark Knight. Yeah, this is not Superman. I can't remember who said this, someone smarter than me, but if you walk into a theater for a Superman movie, ideally, the entire theater should be lit up so you can see everybody's face. And if you walk into a Batman movie, if it's done right, you shouldn't be able to find your seat if you're 60 seconds late. These are very different characters. Metropolis and Gotham, both based on New York City, although Metropolis originally based in part on Toronto. Metropolis, Superman's home, is described as New York City on the brightest, sunniest day in mid-July, and Gotham City is New York City in the dingiest area on the coldest night in November.
And the production design won the Academy Award that year. A guy named Anton Furst won the Oscar for set design, and brilliant set design.
Yes, very the Gothic and pseudo 1940s, like it's a tradition that was carried on in the Batman the Animated Series that followed shortly thereafter. And Batman's a win. It's got that iconic score by Danny Elfman. Again, Nicholson echoing someone like Brando being brought in for Superman, a real, box office A-lister actor. And they wanted a sequel really quickly, and it happened.
Yeah, 3 years later, in 92, Michelle Pfeiffer plays the Catwoman. Danny DeVito plays the Penguin in Batman Returns. And it, again, a lot of people thought this was superior to the first one. I thought Pfeiffer deserved the Academy Award nomination. She was absolutely spectacular. And the knock on the first two Batman films is that the villains are more interesting than Batman himself.
Yeah, and that's something that would be said of a lot of superhero movies. What's fascinating about Michelle Pfeiffer is that she was absolutely brilliant as Catwoman. But what's interesting is that she is Selina Kyle. But other than that name, her entire character was completely rewritten from who that character was.
Right.
Um, Selena Kyle is not a blonde, but they gave her a job and an apartment, whereas she's this sort of vagrant jewel thief. But it didn't matter. Once she put on that costume and got that whip out, she's still the best Catwoman we've ever seen.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And Danny DeVito was a really inspired choice to play the Penguin. And again, they kind of messed with this character's, the way they approached it. Oswald Cobblepot was sort of a plump guy in white tie and tails and a criminal and all that, but Tim Burton made him into sort of a sideshow freak, and it worked.
It did work, and Danny DeVito embraced the role, loved the makeup, loved everything about it, and was always after ways to make it more and more disgusting. If Michelle Pfeiffer was going to be beautiful and sexy, he was going to be disgusting, and he was totally down with that. He let them do pretty much whatever they want.
And a great Christmas movie.
It was. Two more followed. Tim Burton stepped away and handed the directorial reins to different filmmakers. Batman Forever in 1995 took a lot of heat. Val Kilmer was beat up pretty good by the critics for his performance. But I'll tell you what I like in this movie is Jim Carrey. I thought he was spectacular as the Riddler. And who I hated was Tommy Lee Jones, an actor I normally admire, who was just awful and over the top as Two-Face.
Val Kilmer, if I had to say my least favorite actor to play the character, I guess I would pick Kilmer, but I've never really disliked any actor who's played Batman. The Schumacher films sort of became notorious because he put nipples on the bat suits.
Yes.
His justification was that he wanted them to look like statues of Greek gods. Kilmer's fine. I was a kid at this point in time, and I had just decided the year before that I wanted to be an actor, and it was because of Jim Carrey, 100%. So I was elated when I heard that he was going to play the Riddler, and he's phenomenal as the Riddler. He absolutely tipped his hat to Frank Gorshin from the 66 television show.
He did. Yes, he did.
And he's brilliant. He's brilliant as Edward Nygma before his transformation. And you're right. Two-Face is utterly atrocious in this movie for several reasons. And I don't think the casting of Tommy Lee Jones was necessarily the problem. He was just written as, second fiddle to Jim Carrey, who stole every scene. But I think
it was written poorly, but I also think the director was intimidated by Tommy Lee Jones is a pretty intimidating guy. I've interviewed him, and he's a hard ass, man. He doesn't suffer fools. Right. And I don't know how anybody would direct him without having just the slightest bit of fear. I mean, you're not gonna pull him aside and say, Tommy, can we try it a little different? Because he'll bite your head off. Right. And I don't think he's undirectable in a film like this. He's going to go crazy over the top. He and Jim Carrey didn't get along. He and Drew Barrymore didn't get along. It was just a mess.
There is something that happens with Two-Face in this movie, which to me is completely unforgivable. And it shows a major lack of sense in the production of the film. And that's a scene where after discovering that Batman is Bruce Wayne, the Riddler and Two-Face storm Wayne Manor.
Yep.
And Bruce Wayne is knocked unconscious at the foot of a stairwell, and Two-Face approaches him with a gun. And as he does, takes his special two-headed coin with one side scratched out, and he tosses it to decide whether or not to kill Bruce Wayne. And the coin lands, and he gets, no, you don't kill him. And then they have him toss the coin again to try and get a different answer.
Yeah.
This is a fundamental betrayal of everything that character is and represents.
And that's why the movie was the beginning of the end, I think, because next came Joel Schumacher's Batman and Robin. I like George Clooney. I think George Clooney is a wonderful actor, but what he was doing in this, I have no idea. I think he was okay as Bruce Wayne. He was okay as Batman, but the movie itself is just a series of innuendos from Arnold Schwarzenegger, The same thing with Uma Thurman playing Poison Ivory. She was just trying to one up Mae West. I mean, it was just a terrible film.
It is a delightful, atrocious mess, and it's my favorite bad movie because it's just awful. But I find it endlessly watchable. And I don't. The only thing that George Clooney did wrong was agree to be in this movie. He honestly, I think he was a good Bruce Wayne. I don't have any problems with his performance in that movie, given the material he had to work with. But you're right. I mean, Arnold Schwarzenegger's ice puns are just ridiculous. There's not really much of a story. It's complete style over substance.
Yeah.
And another thing they did that I think is unforgivable is that they took the character of Bane, who had always been a formidable nemesis of Batman and on par genius level intellect and strategist with Bruce Wayne, and they just made him a mindless henchman for Poison Ivy.
Yeah, he was a thug, nothing more.
Yeah. And again, the bat nipples didn't help, but that signaled the end of that franchise. That was the nail in the coffin.
I interviewed Joel Schumacher for this film when it opened, and he knew how bad it was. And one of his comments to me, he said, "I just hope people go in and have a good time." And I looked at him and I said, "Do you really think that's going to happen? I mean, can you look me in the eye and say that's going to happen?" And he just smiled. He didn't say a word.
And the ironic thing is, if I ever am scrolling through the TV channels and I see Batman and Robin, I have to stop and watch at least 15 minutes of it. I find it watchable just because of how bloody awful it is. But it's still Batman, and there's a lot of laughs to be had in hindsight. But yeah, it's just a series of bad decisions.
I remember seeing it at the press screening, and within 15 minutes, I was so over Chris O'Donnell. I think he has a line in there where he says, chicks dig the car. I want a car."
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, I'm finished with this guy. This is absolutely brutal. And then we get a Batgirl. And I thought, what's next? Are we going to have the Riddler pop up and the Catwoman pop up and Penguin back? I mean, where's it going? And mercifully, no. But that's the only time I've watched that film from beginning to end. I've seen bits and pieces of it since, but I've never watched it again all the way through.
Oh, yeah, me neither. And again, like with Batgirl, her name is Barbara, but she's completely rewritten from who Batgirl is. Batgirl is Barbara Gordon, the daughter of Commissioner Jim Gordon. Yep. But in this, she was made Alfred's niece for some reason.
Just a stupid idea all around. A terrible movie. The one good thing that came out of Batman and Robin is it sent Joel Schumacher scampering back to independent film, and he made a brilliant war film in 2000 called Tigerland with Colin Farrell. And interesting, I interviewed him for that, and he said to me, "I remember you. You're that nasty Canadian that picked on me for Batman." Well, was I wrong? And he said, "No, you were right." In 2000, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, just one more note. It should also be noted that George Clooney freely mocks himself for doing this movie. And I believe he's even stated that if you approach him on the street and ask for a refund for your ticket, he'll give you the money.
Yeah, he's pretty down on it. In 2000, the X-Men, one of the more popular superhero groups, came to the big screen after a long animated series that populated the airwaves on television.
Yeah, and I grew up on the 90s cartoon superhero shows, but for some reason, I'm not really sure, I never got into the X-Men show, which worked to my benefit because the big screen adaptation directed by Bryan Singer that 20th Century Fox made was pretty damn fast and loose with the source material. I would only find that out later. But for someone going in fresh, I remember I saw that movie with my dad, and I really, really liked it. And it had a brilliant cast with Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart and this Australian actor by the name of Hugh Jackman, who I will freely admit, was woefully miscast as Wolverine, because Wolverine is supposed to be 5'3" and not really handsome, and more of a Robin Williams, with muscles type.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
he went on to just define and own that character, and he got better and better and better at it. And X-Men repopularized the superhero genre after Batman and Robin had left a bad taste in everybody's mouth. Singer returned to do the sequel, X2, X-Men United, which I think is better than the first one. Has a brilliant performance by Brian Cox as the villain, William Stryker. And that franchise would go on and on and on and on, and it's
Last
fun
year
now.
with Dark Phoenix, which was one of the worst films I saw last year. Just brutal.
Yeah, X-Men 3, The Last Stand, I didn't mind. I thought it was okay. X-Men Origins Wolverine, I really disliked. I thought that was just mishandled completely. But then they made a prequel set in the 60s, X-Men First Class, with Michael Fassbender and James McAvoy playing the younger versions of Charles Xavier and Magneto, the Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen roles. And that movie was great. And then they made X-Men Days of Future Past in 2014. Bryan Singer came back to the franchise as director, and that united the prequel cast with the original cast. And I know it's hard to keep track of all those movies, but I think it's the best X-Men film. And then after that, X-Men Apocalypse, just I didn't care. Hugh Jackman made 2 more solo Wolverine movies that were decent. And then, yeah, Dark Phoenix. And now it's all a moot point, because 20th Century Fox is now 20th Century Studios, and it's owned by Disney. And so they own all the rights to their characters again.
And you know what they'll do? They'll go back and reboot it.
They are going to introduce the X-Men and the Fantastic Four into the already established Marvel Cinematic Universe, which, I mean, it seemed inevitable. They got Spider-Man from Sony, and now finally Marvel Studios has all the Marvel characters. And so it'll be interesting to see how they reintroduce those characters. I've heard rumors of Taron Egerton being Wolverine. I would love to see that. But I don't think we're going to see that for a while, but it should be interesting.
In 2002, Sam Raimi brought Spider-Man to the screen after years of waiting. I mean, so many directors have been attached to this. James Cameron,
Yeah.
George Lucas at one point, and finally Raimi did it with Tobey Maguire. And it kicked ass. This was a knockout movie. The sequel, was Spider-Man 2, was even better, with Alfred Molina as Dr. Ock. And the 2 of them got rave reviews. They made a ton of money, and then that series fell apart.
Right. Well, Spider-Man kicked ass. You're right. In hindsight, I think Tobey Maguire might have been a little miscast based on what we know Peter Parker's kind of supposed to be like. But Spider-Man was very, very, my favorite superhero has always been Batman, but Spider-Man, very, very close second. I'm currently wearing a Batman t-shirt and drinking from a Spider-Man mug.
That's sad. That's just sad, dude.
Whatever. And I was a big fan of the 90s Fox Kids Spider-Man show, and so I was super excited when they were making the film adaptation, and they hit all the bullet points of his origin story. It was perfectly executed. Willem Dafoe was great as the villain, and you're right, Spider-Man 2 with Alfred Molina as Dr. Octopus, still one of the greatest superhero movies ever made.
Absolutely.
As far as I'm concerned.
You mentioned you thought Tobey Maguire was miscast. Tell me why, because I quite liked him as Spider-Man. I thought he was a terrific Spider-Man.
I like him. It's just now that I have the perfect guy playing him now, it's like, let me put it this way. His acting he's a great Peter Parker.
Yep.
I just don't think he's kind of quippy enough and smart alecky enough for Spider-Man.
Okay, fair enough.
But I mean, he's great in that universe. And a problem that would happen again is that he's too old. He was
Yeah.
never age appropriate for the character. Sam Raimi would make a third Spider-Man movie in 2007. And this one put an end to that franchise for a couple of reasons. It featured the dual villains of Flint Marko, aka the Sandman, and Eddie Brock, Venom. And the problem was that Raimi only wanted to use Sandman as the villain, but the studio pressured him into using Venom, who everybody wanted to see face off against Spider-Man. As far as I'm concerned, what he should have done, Raimi, was eliminate Sandman completely, because I think he's a stupid character, and focus on Venom. But the problem was he did Venom all wrong. He ignored everything that made Venom interesting. He woefully miscast Topher Grace, who admirably gave it his best shot, and he turned Peter Parker into an emo street dancing, whatever. And so the movie was just a jumbled mess, and it was rushed, and plans for a fourth movie were scrapped because they were going to rush Raimi again, and he didn't feel like he had the time to do it appropriately.
Well, he certainly got the first two right, but I agree with you. The third one was a mess. There's a scene where Tobey Maguire, as the bad Peter Parker, is walking up the street, jiving and jittering, and he looks like an ass. He looks like a perfect ass. And I remember thinking, I need to leave this movie, but I can't. The PR people are at the back. In 2003, Ben Affleck put on a superhero costume in Daredevil.
Yes.
Which I think kind of gets a bad rap. You know who I really enjoyed in this movie was Colin Farrell.
Yes.
I thought he was great, just over the top enough to be goofy and fun. But the critics killed Affleck.
I also think this movie gets a bit of a bad rap. There is a slightly different director's cut, which improves on it a bit. I mean, Ben Affleck took the role of Matt Murdock, Daredevil, because he said, well, they've already done Batman and they'll never let me play that. And so...
How ironic is that?
Right. I think it was a fun movie. I liked Michael Clark Duncan as the Kingpin. You're right. I absolutely loved Colin Farrell as Bullseye.
His introduction scene is fantastic. Just brilliant.
And there's a case of them sort of rewriting the character and having it work, because he was never an Irish kind of like biker guy in the comic, but it didn't matter. So I don't hate that movie as much as everyone else does. In the last decade, Marvel Studios did a Netflix Daredevil show starring Charlie Cox as Matt Murdock and Vincent D'Onofrio as the King. Very, very dark, really kick-ass, on point adaptation of that character. But I'm a diehard Ben Affleck fan, and I always have been, and we're going to talk about him more down the line. But yeah, a lot of people point to that as like, one of the most terrible superhero movies, and I don't really think it deserves all the hate it gets.
One of the biggest surprises I had was when Ang Lee agreed to direct Hulk in 2003. And it came out just a piece of junk, quite frankly. I remember sitting in the press screening thinking, Ang Lee, one of my favorite directors, made this movie. And he chose to use a CGI creation as the Hulk. And I don't know what Eric Bana was doing in that film. He certainly didn't give it the old college try, but I don't think they really found the right Banner until Mark Ruffalo stepped into it much later down the line. Right.
Yeah, Ang Lee's Hulk is it's a movie I tried to like. And some of the framing and filming styles resembling comic book panels. It's like there's stuff in there. It's like the Hulk was way too neon green. I could have done without the purple pants. And the script, it had bigger ambitions than it was willing to execute. It just needed tightening up. So it was kind of a misfire on all points.
I think he tried to make an epic, and it just wasn't an epic film, in any way at all.
And we've since learned that the character of Bruce Banner, the Hulk, really works best when it's not him in his own movie.
Right. When he's a supporting character, he's terrific. As again, Mark Ruffalo has proven.
Yeah.
We had two back-to-back stinkers with Catwoman in 2004 and Elektra in 2005, both with women leading the way. And both of them tanked, both with critics and at the box office.
Just awful. Utterly forgettable. Catwoman was just, Catwoman in name only. They gave her the suit, and then they gave her magic cat powers, and it wasn't Selena Kyle. And yeah, real low points. Unfortunately, female starring movies, but nothing really worth talking about.
No, not at all. Christopher Nolan kicked things into high gear in 2005 with Batman Begins, which kind of came out of nowhere. I mean, people knew he was making this movie, but then it comes out, and the press screening, we go, and it's terrific, like absolutely terrific. And it goes back and reinvents the whole story, which I quite liked. And of course, it was the first of the great Dark Knight trilogy.
Yeah, I've been lucky in that I've always sort of been the appropriate age for what was happening with Batman. And I was 19 when Batman Begins came out, and I was so ready for an earnest, serious adult take on this. It's not this fantasy action movie, it's a crime thriller. And there's a great scene in Tim Burton's Batman when Batman sweeps in on the grappling gun and rescues Vicky Vale and gets her out of there post-haste. And Jack Nicholson's Joker says, "Where does he get those wonderful toys?" And Batman Begins spent 2 hours answering that question.
Yeah.
It is the perfect origin story movie. And Nolan got a brilliant cast together, and he showed us the evolution of Bruce Wayne into this vigilante. And you wonder, it's like, how did he learn to fight like a ninja, and how did he manage to have a base of operations excavated from underneath his mansion, and where does he get all the cool stuff from? And you see him evolve, you see him stumble before he becomes the Batman. And it's like well into past halfway into the film before we ever really see Batman. And it's the reason reboots are such a huge thing. It popularized that idea, like, oh, you can start fresh. And I mean, casting Michael Caine as Alfred, brilliant. What I really liked about it was they explored the surrogate father relationship between Alfred and Bruce that had never really been explored. It's a character study.
Yeah.
And it's awesome.
And I like that he cast Christian Bale, a true actor,
Oh, yeah.
a brilliant, gifted, method actor who I think is the best Batman ever. I don't think anybody will ever touch him.
He's the best Batman because he's been in the best Batman movies. I'll give you that.
Oh, true enough. Nolan certainly knew what he was doing.
And man, nothing makes a superhero movie more satisfying than a perfect final scene or a final shot. And as much as the climax of Superman the movie bugs me, you've got that final shot of him floating in Earth's atmosphere and, looking at the camera. Bam. Batman Begins has the perfect ending. And Christopher Nolan basically always has a perfect ending to his movies. And you see Batman and then Lieutenant Jim Gordon on the roof of Gotham City Police Department, and he shows him the new bat signal. And not only does it put a final button on this movie, it teases the sequel in such a perfect way when he says, take this new guy, armed robbery, double homicide, flair for the theatrical, like yourself, leaves a calling card, and he hands him a plastic baggie, turn it over, and it's a Joker card. And everybody shit their pants, like, oh my God, bring me that sequel right now.
In between that sequel, we had some weak films. We had Ghost Rider. We had a second Fantastic Four movie. They can't get the Fantastic Four right. This one was Rise of the Silver Surfer, and it was brutalized by the critics. But we also had one that you and I agree is underrated and unappreciated, Superman Returns.
Oh, I think you and I differ on Superman Returns.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, how about you go first?
I think it's terrific. And of all people to get it right, I think Brian, I'm not a fan of Brian Singer. I think he's a repellent human being.
Right.
And I'm not crazy. Pardon?
I am not okay. I like a lot of stuff in Superman Returns, and again, this is a movie I wanted to like.
Yeah.
But on the whole, I don't know what the hell they were thinking with this movie. I don't know if this movie knows what it is. It's a sequel to the first two Christopher Reeve movies, kinda. It's kind of a remake of Richard Donner's Superman. I think Brandon Routh was great. I think the entire cast was great, except for Kate Bosworth. That opening scene with the airplane is stunning, and the rest of the movie is boring as shit. And this is a movie where Superman doesn't throw a single punch. And here's, again, we're talking about suspension of disbelief here, and I'm willing to believe some silly things in a Superman movie, but there's one thing in this that just absolutely kills me. Superman has disappeared from the face of the earth for 5 years.
Mhm.
So has Clark Kent. No one has heard from him, got an email, postcard, anything. Clark Kent comes back to work for the Daily Planet, magically gets his job back, and the same day Superman shows up. And nobody
figures it
puts
out.
2 and 2 together.
Yeah. I think it's
But-
filled with some great images. And you mentioned the plane thing at the beginning of it. Fantastic. The effects were fantastic. There's a great scene where Superman needs to energize himself, and he floats up into the heavens, and the sun warms him. He draws his energies from the sun.
Yeah.
And heads back to Earth to fight Lex Luthor and end this ridiculous real estate thing he's trying to do. I like Kevin Spacey as Lex Luthor too. I thought he was terrific.
Yeah, absolutely. I again,
It had a lot of good things in it. I liked that it forgot completely about Superman 3 and 4
right.
because we had forgotten about them. And I liked that he put that out there that, yeah, you know what? These movies were shit. So let them go. And let's just make a sequel to part 2.
What surprised me was that they had just demonstrated an absolute winning formula with Batman Begins.
Mhm.
And I love Man of Steel unapologetically. Man of Steel is the Batman Begins version of Superman. And I think it's the movie they should have made in 2006. We might have had a Justice League with Brandon Routh and Christian Bale. You never know.
You never know.
You know, I loved the suit, the Superman suit that Brandon Routh weared. I like that he was like an analog for Christopher Reeve. There's a lot in it that I like, but it sets up this weird plot line where he's got a kid at the end, and like there's a reason a sequel was never made. I tried to like it, but on the whole, I think it was a misfire.
I think it was far superior to the one that they were talking about with Nicolas Cage.
Oh God, yes.
Where we were going to have, one of the studios, John Peters, I think, said to Kevin Smith,
Yep.
I want a spider. I want a giant spider at the end of it.
Yep.
And Kevin Smith said, why? He said, gotta have it. Gotta have it. And
Yeah.
had to remember there was a giant spider at the end of Wild Wild West, which he also produced. And it was a bomb, a huge bomb. So had he made that film with Nicolas Cage, atrocious. The whole
Superman
idea.
Lives. Yes.
Yeah.
Kevin Smith said that he relayed his meetings with John Peters, and he said the first 3 things John Peters said to him is, I don't want to see him fly, I don't want to see him in the suit, and he has to fight a giant spider at the end of the
Yep.
movie.
Yeah, John Peters is a nut. He really is a nut. And how he managed to run a major studio, I don't know. In 2008, Christopher Nolan delivered what I think is the greatest superhero movie ever made, The Dark Knight, with Heath Ledger's Oscar-winning, iconic, brilliant performance as the Joker. And this, for me, was the one where superhero movies became art. They became so much more than just a blockbuster entertainment. Christopher Nolan made a work of art with this movie, with a heart and a soul, and it's perfect. Gary Oldman is perfect. That wonderful ending with he and his son, where Batman tells him he has to hunt him because he's the hero, or Harvey's the hero.
He's the
they
hero
need.
we deserve, but not the one
Yeah.
we need right now.
And Heath Ledger's performance, I mean, he took risks with that performance. He could have looked like a fool. He never does. It's absolute perfection.
As Kevin Smith said, it is the Godfather Part 2 of comic book movies.
Good point. Good point. Well said.
It is the finest comic book movie ever. It's tough to define things as superhero, but yes, I mean, it is the gold standard. It's a perfect movie. At the end of Batman Begins, when we saw that Joker card, it's like, whoa, you're giving us a huge promise, and it delivered on everything. Heath Ledger, he was the Joker. He was perfect. He was everything that the Joker was supposed to be. Utterly terrifying and hilarious at the same time. From the moment he walks into that board meeting room full of gangsters and says, "I thought my jokes were bad." And I remember being in the theater, and when one of the gangsters like threatens to, he's like, "Enough from the clown." He gets up and he pulls a bunch of grenade strings out of his jacket. And the guy's like, "You think you could steal from us and just walk away?" And Heath Ledger's just like, "Yeah." And I just laughed so hard. I mean, there's not enough good things to say about that movie. It really is. It's the gold standard.
I like the range he displayed after playing Innes Del Mar and Brokeback Mountain, a soft-spoken, taciturn cowboy, gay cowboy, and then to turn around and do this. The characters were night and day. I was a big believer he should have won the Academy Award for Brokeback Mountain.
Yeah.
And The Dark Knight was nominated for 8, not director or picture, as it should have been, because it was nominated for the DGA Award. And when he won the Oscar, that was absolutely just. There were the clowns in Hollywood who said, "Oh, it's posthumous because he died." No, absolutely not. He deserved it. Everybody in the audience knew he deserved it. I suspect they all voted for him. You know, it's one of the most electrifying performances I've ever seen.
The greatest cinematic bad guy since Hannibal Lecter.
Yep.
And yeah, I mean, there was a lot of smack talk when they announced Heath Ledger as the Joker. Like, "Oh, the gay cowboy's going to be the Joker." And
Yeah.
I'm always the kind of guy to reserve judgment on this, but I'm just like, Christopher Nolan is making the sequel. Christopher Nolan made Batman Begins. Let Christopher Nolan do whatever the hell he wants.
Yeah. I'm a big believer. I've learned through the years, never, ever shoot your mouth off until you've seen the movie, because you might just get a big surprise. And I remember for years running down Julia Roberts, and then Erin Brockovich comes out and she knocks it out of the park. Notting Hill comes out and she's terrific. Did the same with Adam Sandler, and then he made Rain
Over Me.
Rain on Me, which was wonderful, brilliant performance. And then this year he makes Uncut Gems, and again should have had an Oscar nomination. So I'm very cautious about when I say somebody can't do something. They're in the business for a reason. Chances are they can. Same year as the. Go ahead.
No, sorry, I was just agreeing with you.
Yeah. Also in 2008, going toe-to-toe with The Dark Knight was Iron Man, which I think is kind of the beginning of the Avengers. Robert Downey Jr. was an interesting choice, turned out to be a perfect choice to play Iron Man. And he grew into the character and evolved as the character over a long period of time, over 11 years. And Iron Man was a big, big hit.
And it was a big deal. In 2008, Marvel Studios decided, hey, we're going to open up our own production studio and make our own movies. Because what they had done, unlike Warner Brothers, who owned all the DC properties, so obviously those films were made by Warner Brothers, Marvel Comics had optioned the rights to their characters off to different studios. This is why the X-Men were at 20th Century Fox and Spider-Man was at Sony. And so Marvel Studios was like, well, we don't have all of our biggest characters like Spider-Man and the X-Men. We are going to do a bit of a lesser-known character named Iron Man. And they got Jon Favreau to direct this movie. And we know now in hindsight how much was riding on this movie. And they did not like the idea of Robert Downey Jr. being the guy to have his shoulders with this movie resting on it. He'd been in a lot of trouble with prison time and drugs. And
yet who else could do it after seeing it?
Oh, exactly. He is Tony Stark.
Yeah.
And it made it so much more beneficial for Robert Downey Jr. financially, because they wouldn't sign him on for multiple sequels, which they normally do with an actor in that situation.
Yeah.
And they didn't pay him a lot. And then when Iron Man made bank, they they needed him back, and he held all the cards. And sort of an afterthought in this movie was they got Samuel L. Jackson to secretly film this little post-credit sequence. Now, what some people might not know is that the ultimate version of Nick Fury in the Marvel comics was, and had been for years, drawn to resemble Samuel L. Jackson, with Samuel L. Jackson's official approval. So they got Samuel L. Jackson into playing Nick Fury, and he shows up at Tony Stark's mansion, and he says, "You think you're the only superhero in the world? You become part of a much larger universe. You just don't know it yet. Who are you?" "Nick Fury. I'm here to talk to you about the Avenger Initiative." And the rest is history.
Yeah.
It's became in 11 years, in probably, I think in 10 years it did it. It's the highest grossing film franchise of all time. There are over 25 films now, and they show no signs of stopping. And yeah, Robert Downey Jr. was really disappointed he did not get an Oscar nomination for Avengers Endgame.
Well, he was the heart and soul of the Avengers series, and I'm a spoiler, but if you haven't seen it by now, shame on you.
Right.
His death in Endgame was genuinely moving and genuinely heartbreaking. You know, he's got that great scene where he and Spider-Man find each other again after the kid comes back from the dead, I guess. And, you know, that great embrace and awkward embrace. And, you know, the Spider-Man says, "Oh, we're doing this," because Stark doesn't hug anybody except his child. And a few minutes later, he's gone. And it was genuinely moving.
So many perfect moments in that movie. We got to talk about some other Marvel stuff before we get there, though, I'm sure.
Okay, well, let's talk about some that didn't do so well. The Incredible Hulk in 2010 was a bomb. Jonah Hex.
No, that was 2008. It was the same year as Iron Man.
Same year, I'm sorry. Okay, a bomb. Edward Norton tried his hand at writing, which he does from time to time. He did a great job with Frida, and he did a great job with Motherless Brooklyn. He did not do a great job with The Incredible Hulk. Jonah Hex came along with Josh Brolin and was awful. The granddaddy of garbage of all the superhero movies to me will forever be The Green Lantern.
Right.
With Ryan Reynolds. It was utterly wretched.
Here's another movie I don't hate as much as everybody else. It's not good. I'll give you that. It's not good, but
it was absolutely my worst movie of the year in 2011. There was no other film that even came close.
Warner Brothers and DC comic properties, they've had a rough history with micromanaging their filmmakers, I think. And this is a movie that just reeks of studio interference to me. Martin Campbell's he's a talented filmmaker. I don't think they really let him do his thing. One thing Marvel has always been great at is they hire someone to make the movie and they trust them to do it.
Well, Campbell did a great job with Zorro and was given a Bond film as well. So, I mean, the guy can do the job, obviously.
He did 2 Bond movies. Yeah, he did the first with Pierce Brosnan and the first with Daniel Craig.
Yeah, well, he sure blew it with this one. This one was just brutal.
Yeah, and Ryan Reynolds, he played Wade Wilson in X-Men Origins Wolverine, who is the alter ego of Deadpool. And this is another unforgivable thing in a comic book movie. They took the character of Deadpool and they sewed his mouth shut. If you know anything about Deadpool, you know you don't sew his mouth shut. And the reason Ryan Reynolds did it is because he'd wanted to play Deadpool for so long. And they said to him, it's like, if you ever want to play this character in your own movie, you're going to do it in this one. And thankfully, we got the Deadpool we deserved many, many years later. But he was miscast as Green Lantern for sure.
I love that he makes fun of it in Deadpool 2.
That's what's so brilliant about Deadpool, is that he breaks the fourth wall. And if you've ever read the comics, he is aware that he is a comic book character. And so the movies were just perfect adaptations of that. And yeah, you know, Deadpool goes back in time and he shoots Ryan Reynolds in the head before he can make Green Lantern. How perfect is that?
And gutsy of Ryan Reynolds to allow that, you know, very aware of himself and his own reputation, which I thought was a lot of fun.
There's actually a cut scene from it's in one of the outtakes from the first Deadpool movie where he's talking to Blind Al, the old black lady that he lives with, and he's all depressed because his face is burnt like Freddy Krueger. And she says, "Looks don't matter, Wade." He's like, "Of course looks matter. How the hell do you think Ryan Reynolds got this far? His superior acting method?"
Good for him.
Yeah. So anyway, we've got this massive Marvel Cinematic Universe. Let's try to burn through it real quick. We got Iron Man and the Incredible Hulk in the same year. Incredible Hulk, I didn't mind it. I thought it was better than Ang Lee's Hulk. But again, the Hulk wouldn't really work until later. In 2010, we got Iron Man 2. 2011, they introduced Thor and Captain America. Now, I distinctly remember, even after Iron Man came out, I remember thinking, Thor? Really? They're going to make a Thor movie? How the hell are they going to make that work? That's just a stupid character. It will never, ever work on the big screen. And then
my greatest memory of Thor is, do you remember a stupid 1980s movie called Adventures in Babysitting?
I believe I do, yes.
The little girl is fascinated with Thor, the god of thunder. And they go into a garage to get their car, which has been repossessed. And this guy comes down on an elevator real slow. And it's Vincent D'Onofrio. And big, muscled guy. His hair is blonde. And he's an absolute ringer for Thor. And this little girl walks up to him and goes, "Almighty God of Thunder," taps her hammer. And thinks he's the real deal. That's how I think when I think of Thor. I don't think of the movie Thor. Not now. I think of him in Endgame when he was big and fat and funny.
And Ragnarok, yeah.
Yeah, but you know, the movie itself, I guess it was another part of the Avengers series beginning. Marvel was rolling out their Avengers franchise.
Yeah, and it's not one of their better entries. It did its job, but I remember going from thinking Thor is a ridiculous character that will never work on film, and then they said Kenneth Branagh is going to direct it, and I was like, oh, now it makes sense.
Yeah,
that could work.
Yeah.
Joe Johnston directed Captain America, the First Avenger, which tells of Steve Rogers' origin story in the Second World War. I really dig that movie.
It's a great movie. It's a great movie. He's a great character.
He really is. And Chris Evans, who had previously played Johnny Storm, the Human Torch in the Fantastic Four movies, people were surprised when he was cast as Steve Rogers. And like Downey for Tony Stark, he evolved and he grew into the character, and by the time his character arc's completed in Endgame, he's just absolute perfection.
And was there a dry eye in the house at the end of Endgame when he goes up as an old man? That was wonderful.
And the final shot of the movie is him getting that dance with Peggy.
Yeah.
And so that the World War II movie, Captain America: The First Avenger, I loved Hugo Weaving as the Red Skull. I think he's a real fun, kind of over-the-top villain. In 2012, actually, let me back up. So Nick Fury shows up at the end of Iron Man. This starts the trend of the post-credits sequence, which is teasing the new thing that's coming from Marvel. So at the end of Iron Man, Nick Fury's like, "I'm here to talk about the Avenger Initiative." At the end of Incredible Hulk, Robert Downey Jr. shows up in a bar and he talks to William Hurt's General Ross. He's like, "We're putting a team together." At the end of Iron Man 2, in the middle of Iron Man 2, Agent Coulson, played by Clark Gregg, is called away to go to New Mexico. And the post-credits scene is that they found something in New Mexico, and the camera pulls back, and it's Thor's hammer. And then at the end of Thor, we get a tease of Dr. Eric Selvig, played by Stellan Skarsgård, talking to Nick Fury about this cosmic cube known as the Tesseract, which was the MacGuffin in Captain America: The First Avenger. And so when we finally saw Captain America: The First Avenger, the post-credits scene was the teaser for the Avengers. And this was a big deal. The biggest deal since The Dark Knight, as far as comic book movies go. It had never been tried before. We're going to introduce these guys in their own separate movies and bring them together for a team-up. And everyone was wondering, who's going to direct the Avengers? Are they going to get Jon Favreau back to do it? Who are they going to get? They got Joss Whedon. Joss Whedon is a bit of a legend in the geek community. Created Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Created the sci-fi television series Firefly. And he hadn't really done any movies. He had made a movie called Serenity based off of his TV show Firefly. But I had a feeling that he was the right choice. This guy just gets geek material. And the Avengers is just so damn awesome from start to finish. Getting all these big egos together, not agreeing and forcing them to work as a team. And you got this great villain in Tom Hiddleston's Loki. And that movie, that's like one where, you know, fanboys were cheering in their seats, finally seeing all these guys come together. It was pretty damn awesome.
I remember seeing it at the press screening and thinking, my youngest daughter at the time was a big Avengers fan, and thinking, I'm going to be at the movies this weekend watching this again with Ariana because she's going to want to see it. And sure enough, that's where we were.
And we got Mark Ruffalo as the Hulk.
Yeah, and, you know, a terrific film. We also got a comeback that year for Spider-Man that would have been left better undone. The Amazing Spider-Man, and later The Amazing Spider-Man 2 with Andrew Garfield, who's legitimately a good actor. The guy was Oscar nominated for Hacksaw Ridge. But as Spider-Man, no, this movie was done because they owned the rights and they had a couple more movies they could make, not because it should have been done. And another origin movie, just really not that long after the original.
Yeah, the Amazing Spider-Man films have this fundamental problem that they have no good reason to exist.
Yep.
And when I heard they were going to redo Spider-Man's origin story, I was like, what the hell are you going to do? It's been done. You can't change it. It is what it is. What are you thinking? And they're like, oh, we're going to put it, you know, like a Batman Begins edge. I was like, Spider-Man is not a dark character. Don't do that. It's not. And it was I hated the costume. That's just a small thing. I think everyone involved in the production, the cast, the director, Mark Webb, they gave it their best shot. But like I said, these movies had no reason to exist. Kirk Connors, the Lizard, was a poor choice for a villain. They just did it because it hadn't been done before.
Yep.
The Amazing Spider-Man 2 has Jamie Foxx as Electro, and he's following in the footsteps of Arnold Schwarzenegger as Mr. Freeze.
Yeah, it was even worse, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, visually, action-wise, it had all the necessary, you know, stuff, but there's two fundamental problems with the Amazing Spider-Man movies. Number one, they have no reason to exist. Number two, by the end of the Amazing Spider-Man 2, Gwen Stacy has died. Mm-hmm. This is because Peter Parker screwed up. And the reason Peter Parker screwed up, it's a little known fact that in comic book superhero lore, the most famous line of dialogue ever spoken by anyone is, with great power comes great responsibility. It's what Uncle Ben tells Peter before he dies. And it's Spider-Man's motto for the rest of his life. And in the Amazing Spider-Man films, Peter Parker is never told that with great power comes great responsibility, and thus never learns that. And so as far as I'm concerned, it's not even Spider-Man.
I completely agree. I hated them both. They both made my 10 worst list, and they remain there. They're just awful.
No reason to exist.
Yeah. 2013 saw the reboot of Superman with a new Superman. Yep. And you and I part company on these ones, on this one completely. You love it. I don't. I'll let you talk about it.
Yeah, you and I are pretty much in total agreement when it comes to Batman, but when it comes to Superman, we're kind of on opposite teams. I love Man of Steel. Man of Steel is the Batman Begins version of Superman. It is the exact same formula, origin story they used for Batman Begins, and they applied it to Superman. Even Zack Snyder, the director, who I'm a big fan of, he had previously directed comic book adaptations like 300 and Watchmen, very, very stylish, graphic novel looking aesthetics to these movies. Not so much in Man of Steel. He was doing a Christopher Nolan impression behind the camera. I love this movie. I saw it 3 times in the theater. I think it's a great movie about fathers and sons. I think the cast is impeccable. I love Henry Cavill. It's unfortunate he didn't get to flex his muscle as Clark Kent too much, but Kevin Costner as Jonathan Kent was perfect. I really liked Russell Crowe. I liked all the stuff on Krypton. there are a couple. I can find like two faults with it. I don't like the way Jonathan Kent dies. I think that could have been written better, although I do think it was well executed and well filmed. It's still very emotional. And I don't know why the colors were so desaturated. There's a scene where Superman is sitting in an interrogation room with Lois Lane, and you can barely tell that he's got red and blue in his suit. But yeah, I remember I saw that in and around Father's Day. My old man had been gone for a while, and I think it's a near masterpiece. I really love it. I think it's I know. All right, so you can post all your hateful comments below the YouTube link here, or you can email us at puttingfriendsandfilm at gmail.com. But Man of Steel is hands down the best Superman movie that's been made.
Oh,
yeah,
seriously.
Absolutely.
Please post your comments. Please post, I disagree with Nick.
I'm not saying
the
Henry
color
Cavill
deception.
surpasses Christopher Reeve, but as far as a Superman movie, hands down. No apologies for that.
Kevin Costner is terrific. I'll give you that. Russell Crowe is excellent. I agree with that. Although he didn't suggest the godliness of Brando. I'm not sure any actor ever would.
Right.
But the desaturation of the colors ruined the film for me. Superman's a colorful story. I mean,
Yeah.
the red, white, and blue, let's face it. And the red, white, and blue is important, hugely important. He's going to fight for truth, justice, and the American way. And they desaturate the colors so you can barely discern the color of his suit. I thought it was a stupid, stupid choice on the director's part. I
I'm with you
love
there.
Amy Adams. I think she's a brilliant actress, gifted actress. Give her something to do.
At least she knew his identity. That made it believable.
Well, yeah, but she had nothing to do. She knew who he was. Big deal. What did she do with it? Nothing. No, it didn't work for me on any level, Nick.
All right, hey man, that's fine. We can talk about the sequel. I've got a lot to say about that.
Go for it. It's
All right.
No, it's coming up, so go for it. Batman versus Superman. Go.
All right. So, after Man of Steel came out, Christopher Nolan. Well, actually, let's do The Dark Knight Rises.
Okay.
We've got to wrap up the Christopher Nolan franchise. Christopher Nolan did something that's uncharacteristic in comic book movies, is that he made a movie that was going to be a third act. It was going to be the ending, the finale to his Dark Knight story. Unfortunately, Heath Ledger died, so he couldn't have gotten 10 sequels with the Joker, which could have been awesome. But he cast Tom Hardy as Bane, a worthy adversary from Batman. Anne Hathaway is a brilliant actress. She's an Oscar winner. She deserves that Oscar wholeheartedly. I am a big fan of her. She was miscast as Catwoman. I'm sorry. She does a fine performance. I have no issue with her performance in that movie. But Anne Hathaway is the girl next door, and she is the perfect girl next door. Selena Kyle is not that. Selena Kyle is the street rat from the wrong side of the tracks. That's just my opinion. It's a fun movie. It's got plot holes you could drive a truck through. What are your thoughts?
Well, I agree. It's got huge plot holes. One of them, the nuclear bomb going off, and then the end of the film with Batman or Bruce Wayne rather, potentially being alive with Selena Kyle. Yeah, are we seeing that? Or are we seeing Arthur's wishes? I don't really know.
Well, I think Alfred actually saw them there, but this is what I don't get. It's like, you do realize that everyone in the world recognizes Bruce Wayne's face, right?
Well, there you go. And they're living quietly in Rome, Jesus. And Marion Cotillard is a great actress. She won an Oscar as Edith Piaf in La Vie en Rose.
Yeah.
And I thought she was absolutely superb as the villain in this movie. She blew away what Tom Hardy was doing as Bane. She was chilling. I mean, this is a woman who has no regard for human life. She's quite content to see Gotham scorched to the ground.
Absolutely.
And by barely raising her voice. It was a remarkable performance. I thought she was terrific. And again, Christian Bale, outstanding as both Bruce Wayne and Batman. Michael Caine, heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking in the film. So I think I liked it more than the other critics did in 2012. I was a big fan.
I really liked it after I first saw it. On multiple viewings, I kind of found problems with it, but it's a solid movie. It's a Christopher Nolan movie.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let's dive into the Avengers because we gotta wrap this up soon, and we're coming up to 2019 quick.
All
So
right.
let's wrap the Avengers, do Batman versus Superman, and then Deadpool.
All right. So Marvel made a second Thor movie. They made a second Captain America movie called The Winter Soldier, which was sort of a 70s political espionage thriller. I really, really liked that. That was the first movie the Russo brothers directed for Marvel.
Yes.
They would go on to direct Captain America Civil War, which was brilliant, which brought Iron Man into the fray, and it got Spider-Man into the Marvel Cinematic Universe with Tom Holland, who is the perfect Peter Parker Spider-Man. And I was thrilled when he got to play with the Avengers, something I was convinced would never happen. Joss Whedon directed an Avengers sequel in 2015 called Avengers Age of Ultron. They had James Spader play this crazy robot villain, and it was fun. Didn't have the impact the first one had. Then Marvel started introducing some second-tier characters. What they did is they introduced Doctor Strange, played by Benedict Cumberbatch, who's a wizard. I like that movie. I'm interested to see more of that. And then the big one, we got to talk about Guardians of the Galaxy. Jeez.
Which I love, both of them.
Absolutely. Just a fun space opera. James Gunn, inspired choice to direct, brought this cosmic outer space element to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which would be explored even more. I loved the idea of the soundtrack being his mixtape, all that stuff. But the big one we got to talk about before the last two Avengers movies is Black Panther.
Yes.
Which Ryan Coogler, brilliant young filmmaker who had made Fruitvale Station and Creed, made this, I think, one of the best superhero movies ever made. It's kind of like James Bond meets the Dark Knight meets the Lion King. It's got a lot going for it. It's one of the greatest villain performances in the Marvel Cinematic Universe from Michael B. Jordan as Killmonger. It was the first superhero movie nominated for an Academy Award for Best Picture.
You think it should have been?
Yes.
Even though Wonder Woman wasn't, and The Dark Knight didn't get it either.
I think both. I think The Dark Knight should have won Best Picture in 2008.
Yeah, I agree.
Sorry. I'm saying I think that Black Panther deserved its nomination. I don't think it should have been the first.
Okay, fair enough, because I don't either.
No.
And quite frankly, I think Wonder Woman should have got a nomination.
Agreed. Wonder Woman was sublime. Patty Jenkins, I mean, it took way too long for that to happen, but I remember seeing Wonder Woman and thinking, all this stuff I've taken for granted watching these superhero movies my whole life. Little girls have that now.
Yeah, and it was Gal Gadot playing a superhero movie playing a superhero character has got to be pretty daunting. Because in a lot of ways, it's like playing Jesus Christ. How do you do it? Because the expectation for what you're going to do is so high. And Gal Gadot approached that with such soulfulness and compassion for the human race and believing that the world could exist with love. I loved every minute of her performance.
Absolutely. And the way I thought Man of Steel was a great movie about fathers and sons, Wonder Woman is a great movie about mothers and daughters.
Yeah, I agree. And
then when I saw Black Panther, that final scene where they're in Oakland and there's a kid playing basketball, a young black kid, and he looks to Chadwick Boseman and he says, "Hey, mister, who are you?" And he just smiles, and then it cuts to black, and it's like, okay, I've had that moment my entire life, and I've taken it for granted, and now young black kids have it too.
That's cool.
So then the two most ambitious superhero movies that have ever been made, Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. Joss Whedon did not come back for a third Avengers movie, and Marvel brilliantly hired the writing, directing team from the last two Captain America movies. They got Stephen McFeely and McFeely and I can't remember the writers' names, but Anthony and Joe Russo to direct Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. And Avengers Infinity War is an epic action movie that makes a lot of fanboy wishes come true. We get to see a lot of superhero action and team ups with Doctor Strange and Iron Man and Spider-Man, but it had this villain as the main character, Thanos, this very, very twisted environmentalist who has a crazy master plan to wipe out half of all life in the universe using these 6 Infinity Stones that have been MacGuffins that were planted throughout the previous films. And Avengers Infinity War was an awesome and entertaining watch, and then they let the villain win.
Yep. I remember when he snapped his fingers and the Avengers started turning to dust. And not secondary characters, you know, Spider-Man,
Right.
Black Panther. I mean, major characters were dropping dead.
I remember this moment by moment in the theater, and I'm watching as they're dusting. I'm like, Bucky, Expendable, Scarlet Witch, Expendable, Black Panther. Okay, they don't stay dead. As soon as Black Panther was dusted, I'm like, okay, they don't stay dead.
Yeah.
And then it's a good movie. I don't know. I might place it in the top 10 of. It's definitely in the top 10 of. It's hard to. You made me rank all these movies. It was daunting. But then Avengers Endgame comes out, and holy shit, Avengers Infinity War hits the ground running, and Avengers Endgame, it's got an opening action prologue, but then it's a slow burn, and it's all this intense character stuff, and 5 years have passed and people are trying to move on, and all that. You've got Captain America and support group, and there's just all these actors who have spent so much time playing these characters get to really give their best meat and potatoes performances in these roles.
The portrayal of grief in the opening, I would say, hour and a half of the film, the way they portray grief and what they've lost was really remarkable from all of them. Scarlett Johansson was extremely good in this film.
Brilliant.
And Jeremy Renner losing his family and having no clue why until he realizes everybody else has lost people too.
That was a brilliant opening scene.
It was. And Downey Jr., you know, just haunted by Peter Parker's death. You know, he's just devastated by it, and he can't change it until he realizes, yes, I can.
And him and Captain America are not on speaking terms, and they have not communicated in years. And he drift in space, and he gets back to Earth, and as soon as he comes face to face with Cap, none of that stuff comes out. The first thing he says to Cap is, "I lost the kid."
Yeah.
And
with such pain, he says that. You know, you just feel the weight of it in his voice.
And Downey is absolutely sublime in every minute of this movie. And even just the look on his face when he sees Spider-Man again, alive again at the end, and Peter Parker's just rambling, because that's what he does. He's an excited kid. And Downey has this moment where he's looking at him in disbelief, and then he kind of just frowns with a smile at the same time. He's just like, the kid is just talking and talking, and then he just grabs him and hugs him.
Yeah.
And this movie had one promise, and it was, we have to deliver on a shitload of promises. And it really, really did. And it has moments where the kid in me just wants to scream with joy, like when Captain America wields Thor's hammer, and all this great emotional stuff. I mean, The Dark Knight is the best comic book movie ever made. I think Avengers Endgame is the best superhero movie ever made. If you want to talk about actual superheroes, but, you know, to the strict definition of it.
It certainly had everything everybody wanted. I sat in a screening room to see it, and then I sat with fans to see it. And listening to the fans talk was more fun at times than watching the movie, because they were so into it, you know, and they were just getting every nuance, every word, every tiny moment. Even when Tony sees Peter Parker again, there are tears in his eyes. And one kid got emotional. He started weeping. He said, "Oh my God, he's crying." And I thought, oh boy, these guys are in.
And then they gave Captain America the happy ending we never thought we'd see him get.
Yeah, that was lovely. That was lovely. Really, really. I was surprised that it wasn't the Best Picture nominee. Well, I shouldn't be surprised, but you know, the Academy can nominate 10, and they nominated 9, so they had room for one more. And
Yeah.
really surprised Robert Downey Jr. wasn't nominated. But with that said, it was a really good year for supporting performances, and I'm betting he was 6th or 7th on the list.
It was a great year for lead performances.
So incredible year for movies in general. They're saying, wow, I don't want to get into
Well, yeah.
and I'm still too angry about that. You want to talk about Batman versus Superman and Justice League? We should do that.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I'll do that. Okay. So, Man of Steel launched a new cinematic universe that was gonna put all the DC characters together. And at Comic-Con, Zack Snyder teased that his sequel to Man of Steel was gonna have Batman in it. Right away, they confirmed it was not going to be Christian Bale. It was going to be a different version of Batman. And there was a lot of speculation about who this was going to be. And then they announced Ben Affleck. And I remember I was working at a pita shop in Stony Creek, Ontario, mopping the floor, closing up for the night. And I just checked my phone, and I got a message on Facebook from a friend who shared a link that says Ben Affleck cast as Batman. And she sent a message to me. She said, "Nick, what do you think about this? I need to know if this is okay." And I Googled it, made sure it was legit, and I thought about it for 2 seconds, and I'm like, yes, 100 times yes, because he's going to do the Frank Miller Batman. He's going to do the Batman who wants to kill Superman from, like, the famous comic, and I was instantly on board with it. I think Affleck was a great Batman. The problem with Batman v Superman is, once again, Warner Brothers meddling too much. Zack Snyder made a 3-hour movie with Batman v Superman, and Warner Brothers said, nope, it's too long. And they made him cut half an hour of it.
Yeah.
And therein lies all the difference.
My problem with it is that it was too much of what Man of Steel was at the end of it. The last battle in Man of Steel between he and General Zod was ridiculous. Ridiculous. And to me, Batman versus Superman just became more of that. And I was bored. I quite agreed. Ben Affleck was a wonderful Batman. I really liked him in the film. And I liked that Wonder Woman showed up. That was great. But overall, as a movie, I'd like to see what he took out put back in, because I suspect he fleshed out the characters a lot more.
The theatrical cut is the movie that 99% of people have seen, and that's where all the bad reviews came in. There was a director's cut released on home media called the Ultimate Edition. I remember buying it on iTunes. It is 3 hours long. It is Zack Snyder's original cut of this movie. It is a vastly superior movie.
Yeah, I've seen it. It is.
And
it is.
I think it's a damn shame that most people haven't. Justice League was an absolute mess, unfortunately, because...
I'm glad you said that, because I'm going to jump in on this. Go for it.
Justice League was an absolute mess because Zack Snyder left the production after principal photography because his daughter committed suicide. Yeah. So the director bailed. And then they brought in Joss Whedon.
Completely justified to walk away. Completely.
Of course. Who could blame the guy? And then Joss Whedon had jumped ship to DC because he was in talks to do a Batgirl movie. And so he was in the offices, and they brought him on to finish it. So my initial reaction is, oh, well, I mean, that's kind of the best scenario. This guy brought the Avengers together. I'm sure he can bring the Justice League together. But no. Warner Brothers clearly brought in Joss Whedon. They're like, look, get your duct tape, stitch this thing together, get it finished, and bring it in at 2 hours. The fact that Justice League is 2 hours even is an insult. And clearly they didn't let Snyder's vision come to fruition, and they didn't let Joss Whedon really have a vision. So this movie was just, they got it across the finish line, and that's it. There are rumors that a Zack Snyder cut of this movie exists and may be released. I really hope that happens. From what I've heard, it could be over 3 hours long, and there's entire plot points that are described in it that were just left on the cutting room floor. I don't know if we'll ever see it, but based on the difference between the director's cut and the theatrical cut of Batman v Superman, I'm sure it would make a huge difference.
Well, I think with Justice League, again, they had a great bunch of characters, and again, they've got Gal Gadot, who alone is worth watching. and they just couldn't make it happen. They couldn't make it happen. The characters had no chemistry together. When they bring Superman back to life, it's no big deal. It's no big deal. And then he starts beating the hell out of all of them. It's just that's stupid. It was just stupid. Mayhem, destruction, special effects for the sake of mayhem, destruction, and special effects.
There were at least two visions potentially for what that movie could have been, and neither one of them came to fruition.
Yeah.
And Aquaman, I liked the casting of Jason Momoa. Thought the Aquaman film was okay.
Had a good look to it. Can't deny that.
Yeah, what kicked ass though was Shazam.
Shazam was terrific. Terrific. A lot of fun. And I have to say that I'm a fan of Suicide Squad only for a single reason, Margot Robbie. I thought she steals every frame of that movie. And she's only on screen, I think, 13 minutes.
I liked Suicide Squad. I didn't hate that movie either. Fanboys are very, very touchy. They get upset easily. But I guess we have to touch. We don't need to get into this, but I just want to give a tip of the hat to one of the great superhero movies we haven't discussed, and that's The Incredibles.
Well, fair enough. The Incredibles is a terrific superhero movie, one of the best, in fact, and one of the best Pixar films. Certainly should have been an Oscar nominee for Best Picture.
We should mention Joker. It's kind of a big deal.
Well, I was leaving it till the end, but yeah, 11 Academy Award nominations, $1.3 billion at the box office, and 2 Academy Awards. Best Actor, the second actor to win for playing Joker, and Best Musical Score. And I think you and I differ on this one a little bit. I loved it. I thought Joaquin Phoenix was extraordinary. I think you think the same on that. But you don't believe this is the Joker of the Batman lore.
Okay. Todd Phillips' 2019 film Joker is a brilliant, brilliant movie.
Yes,
I was enthralled every second of it. Joaquin Phoenix is extraordinary. It is a great, great film. It's not the Joker. There are two sides of my mind at war with this. My nitpicky fanboy side that says it's not really the Joker, but I don't let that ruin the movie for me at all. I was blown away too, man. Like, I'm not taking anything away from this movie. And I honestly, I give it respect, because finally Warner Brothers stopped interfering with their filmmakers, and they basically just said, okay, here, do whatever the hell you want. And this is what we got. I heard a rumor that the original final shot to this movie was something absolutely crazy. And I kind of wish, because the whole movie's just like, it's a big middle finger to everything that's been established before, but you got to respect it for that. I heard that after he's seen in the hospital, it cuts back to the scene in the alleyway with the Waynes. And you see Arthur Fleck there with the gun after he shot the Waynes, and he starts walking away and pauses and has a moment where he says, fuck it, turns around, goes back and shoots the kid, young Bruce Wayne. And that's where the movie was supposed to end. That my head would have exploded if that happened. The
fanboys would have lost their mind.
Yeah. Well, fanboys are going to lose their minds no matter what. I guess we should mention that just yesterday we got our first look at Robert Pattinson's Batsuit.
Yeah.
Matt Reeves is a brilliant filmmaker, enough said.
Well, that's the only reason I'll watch it is because of Matt Reeves. And I've got a growing respect for Robert Pattinson after the films he's made, Good Times and The Lighthouse. I think he's a legitimately good actor, which is good to have in the Batman. And Matt Reeves did a great job with Let Her In.
And the last two Planet of the Apes movies are genuine masterpieces. And I'm kind of jaded. I'm the biggest Batman fan in the world, but I'm kind of jaded with Batman in cinema. It's like, what else are you gonna do? But Matt Reeves, and he looks like he's got a great cast. It's like, okay, if he can find an angle to it, I guess we'll see what happens.
Well, he hasn't failed too often, so it'll be interesting. Okay, I hope the fans enjoyed that discussion of superheroes. Thank you to Nick for taking the other side of the mic tonight, and enjoy and comment below. Thanks.
There you have it, folks. Our superhero spectacular. For those counting, that's episode number 7. Want to thank all of our listeners, both new and existing. This was a long one. We had a lot to cover, and I know there are some things we must have missed and skimmed over, but hey, that's what future episodes are for. Please reach out to us and let us know what you'd like to hear on future episodes of our podcast. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for this and all future episodes of the podcast. Coming up next on episode 8, John and I take a lengthy look at the greatest decade in cinema, the 1970s. Until next time, we'll see you at the movies.